That was just a short break, to get to the second set of slides. So the second set of slides begins with the nature of the code. Again, nature, natura, essence, and immediately when you talk of the nature of the code, you're talking about where this is sourced. The first source of the code of canon law is, of course, scriptures. Um, I just put there two texts for you to just to understand what I really mean when I say that the code of canon law is sourced in sacred scriptures in the Bible. Now you have Matthew chapter 5 verse 17. You know what Matthew chapter 5 is. You know that because that begins with the Beatitudes. But chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 7, you have the Sermon on the Mount. That's exactly where you get into the spirit of the law, or what you would call really laws as such. Now, you have there chapter 5, verse 17. That's verse 17. And verse 17 says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. I have come not to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Again, you take notice of, "Do not think that I have come to abolish." And that's Jesus talking. I have come not to abolish the law and the prophets. I have come to fulfill them. Now, from your exegesis, or from your, your your uh, your lectures in scriptures, that one of the things that we have to be familiar with is, for instance, audience and who's speaking. And you have Jesus, who is a Jew, and talking to Jews or Jewish Christians. And a Jew talking to a Jew has to be mindful of the context. So, can you imagine if Jesus would have said immediately, "I have come to abolish the law"? Probably he would have been shot there. So, you look at the language. "I have come not to abolish the law and the prophets. I have come to fulfill them." Now, that is a very important text if we have to stretch that further to make our understanding of the nature of the code a bit more profound in that sense. Now, you have two things here. One author says, in that statement of Jesus, Jesus represents the continuity and the discontinuity of the law. Continuity: I have come not to abolish the law. That means those laws, or laws for that matter, they continue. We need them. But Matthew's gospel, you're so familiar with that because the language of Jesus in Matthew's gospel is very different. His tendency would say, like, "You have heard how it was said, but this I say to you." So you have like two important uh, statements of Jesus, which brings us, of course, to the Old Testament, allusion to, and then proceeds to what is new. I have come not to abolish the law, the continuity of the law, but I also have come to fulfill the law. Now, if you want a good example of this, a good example is, of course, justice. You talk about legal justice. You talk about legal justice. When somebody, when you cannot stand anymore the case of somebody, in a case of somebody against you, you can you can bring that person to court. But remember what Jesus would tell us on your way to court, like if you still could take it, if I may use in it, I may interpret the way Jesus would say it. If you can still take it, go and reconcile with that person. Because when you arrive at court or in court, that is so difficult. You know what it is to be in court. You know how much time you're going to spend there, how much of your resources will be eaten up, how much you're going to pay your lawyer. The continuity of the law has to come with the discontinuity of the law. And then you talk of legal justice. Of course, what would be seemingly like an opposite of legal justice when Jesus speaks of the discontinuity is what Thomas Aquinas would say, profound and reasonable justice. And profound and reasonable justice touches hearts of people. It looks into circumstance of the law. It looks into situations of persons. That's why you have in your scripture studies, sits im Leben, the situation of life or the situation in life. So that is context. I give you a nice example, and I always like this example. Remember the priest I told you I was with, and then he came from holidays, and he was, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I keep mentioning that has become like a classic example of mine. He comes to see me. He arrived from Belgium, and he had plenty of chocolates, and then he immediately proceeded to see me at the parish hall, and we had a youth meeting. That means children and young people. And then he was so excited, and he brought with him a bag of chocolates. And then he started saying, I have a bag of chocolates for you. But it's very difficult to distribute it because, in Zambia, it's very interesting. The most polite way of giving is when you give yourself to the one who receives. And then it's so nice because they receive that with two hands. You never see a child there. You never see a person there receiving something with one hand. That is almost tantamount to saying, this person is so impolite. But the point there is, my point there is, so he gives the bag of chocolates. He leaves that to the first person with the instruction that take one and pass. And so it begins. The first boy takes one chocolate and passes the bag of chocolates to the next person, until it arrived at a young child, and the boy takes two chocolates. And Father Wim, shouts at him, hey, don't do that. You only take one. And you know what the boy said? Father, how about my sister at home? I also want to give my sister. You see, legal justice, if you have to put that in numerical equivalent, it's not just a 1 plus 1 equals 2, or a 1 equals 1 and a 2 equals 2. Profound and reasonable justice takes into consideration the Leben, the situation of life, the situation and circumstance of the person, the context. So the first source of the code of canon law is sacred scriptures. Matthew chapter 5, verse 17 is a good example. Jesus representing the continuity and the discontinuity of the law. And you will have to see that yourself when you read through and you read in the spirit of the law. Remember what I told you about retroactivity of the law? Very, very, very beautiful example. That law is not retroactive, but when it comes to penal matters, it always wants to deal with what is in favor of the delinquent. Another example is, of course, Romans chapter 3, verse 28. Romans chapter 3 verse 28. And again, you see that for yourself, the 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 sense of how Paul understands or puts to our understanding law itself. Because at the end of the day, when Paul looks into justification, it's justification by faith and not by law. And exactly what I put there in the slide, law can never be a substitute for faith. It cannot be a substitute for grace. It cannot be a substitute for charism, and especially charity in the life of the church. At radio this morning, I heard something like a good reminder for us of the mendicancy law. They were citing, this phenomenon now of many beggars at the traffic intersections, and especially because there are many jeepney drivers who still are not earning anything, and they are there at the intersection, and what should we do? What shall we do with them? And things like that. And then, the one who was interviewed, of course, he cited, mendicancy law. There is what you call, violate, for a mendicant, for a beggar, and then for the one who gives, both are penalized. But, you come to think of it, beggars, they also mirror a society, how the governance of society. So check if it is about law, it is there to give order to the ecclesial society. If it is about law, it is there to render organic development easier in the life of both the ecclesial society and the individual person. Nothing more, because it cannot be a substitute for charity. It cannot be a substitute for grace. It cannot be a substitute for faith. And yet, it is an indispensable instrument to ensure order. Of course, you know that very well, because when you drive from the whole Aurora Boulevard, crossing EDSA, and you go to you're on your way to Santa Mesa. Of course, that's a little bit orderly because there are traffic lights. But when you come back in the evening from Santa Mesa going direction Marikina, my God, that's a whole chaos there in the intersection there, Aurora and EDSA, because there are no more traffic lights and there are no more police. So that's what you get, chaos. So we need laws. We need the code as an indispensable instrument to ensure order. Other things here, when in consideration to, what is that whole thing of the law is it's sourced in scriptures using Matthew 5:17 and Romans chapter 3 verse 28. There are 4 functions of law in society. Canonical rules fulfill their functions within the church. 1, law is an aid to society in its achievement of goals. I highlighted, I capitalized there, law as aid. There's one Latin axiom there, ubi societas ibius. That's easy Latin. Ubi caritas et amor, ubi caritas Deus. Where there is charity, there is God. So it's like ubi societas ibius. Where there is society, there is law. But law is there to serve as aid, as help to society in the achievement of its goals. Which brings us to the second element. Law is also there because it is supposed to afford stability. When you talk of stability, you have good order, you have reliable procedures, you have predictable outcomes. Those three things always go together: good order, reliable procedures, and predictable outcomes. Of course, when you want to have an office of the government that will be smooth, which will attend to the clients in such an order, then you will have to afford stability. And don't forget the third one: law is there to protect rights. When you talk of rights, it should provide avenues of recourse and resolution of conflicts. Avenues of recourse. You will see that in Book 7, in processes. You will see that. You see that even in civil law. If you lose your case in the lower court, go to the higher court. There's what you call appeal. There's what you call court of appeals. Because this is the point. You always have your right to appeal. Even though you are already given the sentence, think that you always have your right to appeal. And then, of course, the last but not the least there, law assists in the education of values. And I like that. You know, when things are what we would call in our training internalized, it's supposed to give you, to lead you to that value. Why do you pray? So you don't need a bell to pray at the end of the day. After all your training, you will see how important prayer is in your life. So it brings you to that. It assists persons in the education of values. I think that's enough for today. I will leave you with that because I have sent you now this second set of slides, and then I will messenger you on what you have to do. Of course, since this is our first experiment for asynchronous lecture, asynchronous lecture means that it's made available to you, the lecture as I'm doing now, and for your part, after listening to me, I will give you something to do. That's on top of what we have already written in our syllabus, because I know that next week before Tuesday, you have something to submit. So on top of that, by way of experimenting this asynchronous style of online teaching and online learning for your part, then you have to do a little bit of something. I will write that to you on Messenger, so that in a 2-page, I will ask you to do a reflection. When I talk of reflection, again, I talk of something that touches you, pierces your heart. It touches you. That means struck you. And I always tell the students that when you write reflection paper, the easiest way is always develop the rule of 3. You have 3 paragraphs. You already know that you have to introduce what you're going to write, and you almost know that you have to conclude. And then you have like a much longer middle paragraph. That's the second paragraph. You still want to use the rule of 3? You divide your middle paragraph into 3. So divide your ideas and come up with something. So since this is my trial with you on asynchronous online teaching, so I hope that we can develop this, and by listening and by reading. I will send you, of course, one reading here, because I found something related to law for the common good. Then you will have something to read, and then to reflect on, and then to write about. Thank you, and see you next meeting.